Hello, my name is Kuhar-Pitters, and today I'm going to be giving a brief presentation on how Tibet has been both imagined and reimagined in an Orientalist context. To begin briefly, what is Orientalism? Well, while it has many definitions, in general terms, it could be described as both a method of discourse and a focus of academic study and inquiry. Um, in the case of Tibet, however, Orientalism can be seen as a flexible positional superiority, or in other words, the creation of a distinction or justification of a separation of power between the West and the East, or in other words, the Orient as it was coined beginning in the 19th and 20th century. Now, taking a closer look at Tibet specifically, where this superiority power dynamic focused definition came from, it came from Tibet being deemed a place full of romance, exotic beings, haunting memories, and various adventures and experiences. Its reality was redefined by a Western audience as a place to separate yourself from the urbanized, dignified, social constructs that defined the West or Europe. And Tibet did not fit these social constructs, so it had to be explored, discovered, and defined so it could be taken from its reality and reimagined in Western reality without being equal to the society that it was brought into. Now, how was this represented? Well, one main method of representing Tibetan Orientalist mindset was through art, specifically art depicting Tibetan figures, primarily women. Now, the reason women were used is because Tibet, like other Orientalist countries, was very feminized. There's a hyper-feminization of Tibet because as noted by Orientalist scholar Thomas Herber, women represented or were the embodiment of nature, the representation of minorities from a individual to regional or even national scale. And the reason why women held this power is because in the Western mindset, especially women who weren't from the West, they were seen as subservient, and thus they were accurate personifications of the hierarchical nature of Orientalism as it pertained to Orientalist countries like Tibet. Now, to see this theory, these different modes of Orientalism in action as it pertained to Tibet, we're going to be looking at a chronological sequence or a comparison between historical and contemporary Tibetan images, but specifically focusing on female subjects as they represent the minority, or in other words, they represent Tibet. Starting with the historical images, travelogues were very popular ways of bringing Tibet to a Western audience by explorers, missionaries, political figures, and the like. To start, we're going to be looking at an image from Isabella Bishop's travelogue among the Tibetans that was released in 1894. Now, to begin with this image interpretation and analysis, we see a female Tibetan figure. Now, where Orientalism first comes into the image is through the authorship. If we look at the image itself, it is entitled Tibetan Girl. So already that power dynamic has been established by the author by taking this grown Tibetan woman and categorizing her as a girl. As we look at the actual image itself, we see that it is a drawing, seeing as photography was not yet used. as a primary form of artistic expression. So again, that authorship, the symbolism and the control of this Tibetan woman is again given to the artist, not only by the title of the piece, by the means of which the piece was constructed. Looking at the piece, we see a woman in traditional Tibetan garb, separating her from Western styles. She's adorned with jewelry and a headpiece, and she's also drawn in a way that heavily emphasizing shading and just the darkness. Another way Tibet was represented, especially through women, is the darker complexion, and by using that, that gap between the East and the West is again built. If we also look at the image, we see her gaze is tilted downward, and it's another way of making her more of a figure of display rather than a person, because the power dynamic is benefiting the viewer because the person in the piece is not directly combating them. Moving to the following image from another travelogue entitled My Journey to Lhasa from 1927, we see another woman, again, in dark clothing, jewelry, a headpiece, except she is sitting down, but despite that, her gaze is still tilted downward, and she's still not making a connection with the audience, again, showing that distinction, that power dynamic that's in favor of what can only be assumed as the Western audience that is viewing her. The use of clothing and body language as the woman takes up the entire frame, crossing that middle horizon line that's bringing our gaze to her. All of these different elements are symbolizing how the Orient or Tibet is separate from its audience and not separate in an equal manner. As we move to more contemporary images, such as the collection by Franz Jacques Beckot, the images are again from between 1907 and 1910, but in the contemporary context, they are brought together in a collection that shows a slightly different Orientalist view. If you look at the women here, they're in lighter clothing, they're making direct eye contact, they have other figures in their background, and this is directly challenging that power dynamic. It's allowing for the women to gain a sense of autonomy, and it's allowing for the authorship has changed until simply displaying women to showing and making the audience want to understand the woman. Why are they looking the way they do? Why do they stand out? Even if their clothing matches the background or is different from the background, why have these changes been made? It's because that Orientalist mindset is evolving while still the West is trying to define Tibet. Tibet is not automatically subservient to the West in this regard, as we see in this first collection, and this is again repeated in this second double image comparison with another female. Here she kind of looks downward, but her presence, she is not curling in on herself like the historical images. She is facing outward, and she is again directly challenging the audience, not in an aggressive way, but kind of in a dismissive, I'm here, but I don't need to justify why I'm here. Now, what do these findings mean for this Orientalist theory of positional superiority? These findings mean that while the Orientalist themes that define artwork, especially artwork depicting Tibetan females, is still prevalent, is slowly evolving from something strictly rooted in a Western reality to something that the Tibetan people are regaining their identity, they're reimagining themselves in their own reality by these subtle changes in how they are portrayed between historical and contemporary collections. These results can be seen in this last image comparison from the Harrison Jorma 2019 collection shown at Oxford. As we see in the black and white image, the woman is again looking at us, but is forlorn. She's curled in on herself, and that power dynamic is clearly defined. But in the other image, there's that pop of color, the first color image we see in this presentation. She is smiling at the camera, she's winking, she is outwardly making her presence known, and while she's still trying to be defined and understood, she's doing it on her terms. And this, again, change in body language, the angle in which she is portrayed, is showing how these Orientalist theories are still around, but they are not as strictly defined, and they're not completely eradicating Tibetan identity. Now, going forward, whether this transition will continue is still up for debate by Orientalist scholars, such as Thomas Herbert or Edward Said, whose quotes and definitions of Tibet we saw early on in the presentation in What is Orientalism. But what we do know is that Orientalism is a very fluid means of defining people, and the way it is imagined can change. It just depends on how it is presented and who is the one doing the presenting.